Hello, everyone. We're going to get started here in just a minute. Thanks for joining me today. Okay, so by my clock, it says it is noon Eastern Daylight Savings Time on the East Coast, which means it's time to get started. Thank you so much for being here. We had quite a number of people register for this, and I think we'll have more showing up here in the next few minutes. Right now, there are about 30 or 40 on the line, and I appreciate every one of you being here. We're going to talk today about refactoring. So if you're here for something else, this isn't the place. We're going to talk about refactoring. And the idea is, I believe it's a term that's misused and often misused so badly in the software development world that we need to talk about it. We need to define it. I think that a lot of people have no idea what it means. So let's get into this a little bit. My name is Paul Merrill. I'm from Beaufort Fairmont Automated Testing Services. We focus on test automation. We help companies in several ways. We help them by implementing DevOps, we help them by automating regression tests, and we help them by syncing up development and testing in agile environments. We do that through consulting, through training in open source tools and methodologies, and we do that through dedicated experts. So if you need people to come onto your team to work remotely, although based in the US, to work remotely with your team on test automation to help your team move forward, to help your test automation efforts move forward. We're the people to talk to. So when you have those needs, please reach out to me. I hope you'll do that. I'm always happy to see you all on this broadcast. My Twitter address is here, dpaulmerrill. If you want to tweet during this, that's just fine. I always like to see what people like, what they tweet about, what they retweet. But let's get started. A couple of things here, just a couple of business notes upcoming. So Lisa Crispin, yes, is going to join us. So she, if you don't know who she is, she wrote, co-authored Agile Testing, which is a wonderful book by the Addison Huxley folks, and her co-author Janet Gregory. They also wrote a second one, More Agile Testing, both great books. Lisa's a wonderful person. She's been a huge supporter of Beaufort Fairmont over the years and a huge supporter of mine. And I've met her at least once. I get to meet her again down at CAST later this year and hopefully get to spend a little bit of time with her and get to know her better. But she's going to join us for the next webinar. So make sure to join us for the whole team automation approach. Number of different approaches to how you do automation on your team. She's a strong advocate of the whole team approach, and this works really well in agile environments. So join us for Lisa on the 23rd of July. Andy Knight's going to come back. So the second highest rated webinar we've done in the last 3 years that we've been doing this was Andy's part 1 of BDD. We had many views of the recording. We had a lot of people on that actual webinar live. Andy's a terrific speaker. Please join us in July for him. Finally, we'll be sponsoring CAST. I'm so excited that this year we've been able to sponsor a number of events. We sponsored the Automation Guild. We sponsored STPCon out on the West Coast. We sponsored the one up in Ohio, QA or the Highway. We've been really happy to support these conferences that are so helpful to you and me. We want to keep those things going and do anything we can to help the community. So once again, we'll be sponsoring CAST. It's a wonderful conference. If you take a look at the Conference for Association of Software Testing down in Cocoa Beach, they have a great lineup, and I only say that because I'm a part of it. I'm kidding. Angie Jones will be down there. My friend Lisa Crispin, I mentioned, will be down there. Ash will be down there. A lot of really wonderful speakers are going to be down at CAST. Take a look at the lineup and join us down there because it's going to be a fun time. Cocoa Beach is a beautiful place. And in August, there are very few other places you want to be than in Florida. So really quick, I like to do a B list. I haven't done this in a while, and I apologize. Try to think of the names of the folks who have been so helpful in the last few months, especially this month. If you see something up there that looks like it might be your name, it probably is. There are a couple of these where it might not be because I have duplicate, John S's or whatever. But I really appreciate all the folks up here. If your name's up there and we've talked recently, it's probably you. So thank you so much to all the folks up here, and congratulations to you for making the B list. So I also want to mention we've got a role. I'm not going to do too much more business stuff here. We've got just another minute of this and we'll get into the content. We've got a role open. We're needing about 4 of these folks. And this is writing test automation scripts in Gherkin. So if you're not familiar with Gherkin, it's the type of language that we use in Cucumber, that we use with VDD. We've got a client who needs quite a few of the people who will write test scripts in Gherkin. I don't necessarily know the perfect person for this. And so when you go to this on our website, when you go out to beaufortfairmont.com and you go into the careers section and you see this job description, it has things like must meet one of the following requirements. So look at that carefully, think through it. Do you meet one of those particular requirements or not? You don't necessarily have to know Gherkin already, but we're looking for entry to mid-level folks, writing a lot of test automation scripts. There won't be a lot of coding involved in this. It's remote work, but you must be US based. And once again, this is starting pretty quickly here. So I'm looking for a number of people. There's an application on there, a button to click, apply. You may see this on LinkedIn with some advertisements soon too. So if you are this person, sign up. If you're not and you know somebody, send it to them. I'd love to talk to them and figure out if we work together. You guys know that every time you're on one of these, you have a chance to win a $50 Amazon card giveaway. So stick around to the end. You may be the person to win it. So what is refactoring and how do I use it in my test scripts? Couple of points here just in using this. I'm going to start out with a poll because I want to see where you are with regard to refactoring and how you relate to it, where you are in your experience, so I know how to better serve you. So here's where we're going to start. What is your level of expertise with refactoring? So I've given you a number of different options here. And while you're voting, I want you to also know that if you have questions, you're welcome to raise your hand. Sometimes I'm not able to see the hands raised quickly enough. So if you want to type in a question, type a question into the GoToWebinar control panel. That should either be in your web page that you're using or in a actual app, a little control panel that pops up on your screen. I don't know which one, but take a minute to do this poll. We've got about 63% voting here. I love getting up to 70 or 80% when we can. But hopefully, and it looks like the results are what I would expect. I'm gonna close this down here in just a second. So I'm gonna close the poll and I'm gonna share it with you. So it looks like most folks are 87% a bit. I hear the term a lot, or I've used it. Not very many people have read the book. Not very many people have read the book and use it every day. That's great. That's just where I'm hoping you'll be. And 11% none. Perfect. Perfect. So we're right where we want to be. Most folks are right where I wanted to be. If you're that kind of person who's used it and you're looking for code examples, we're not going to do code today. If you want to do code, send me a note and I'll do an add-on session for this in the future. I've got some code examples. But you're welcome to drop off. I'm not offended at all if you're expecting to see code. What I want to do today is to take people who have never seen code and show them what refactoring is so that when they go back to their software development environments, when they start working with the other people on their team and they hear the term, hey, or they're saying, I'm going to go back and refactor that, or I'll need to refactor that in order to, they know what to say. They understand what refactoring is and they can have that conversation. So hopefully you can see my screen. You should be able to right now. I'm just going to, not the results anymore. I think you guys saw the results. So let's get going here. What is refactoring? So first, this is my working definition. The working definition here is that refactoring is the changing of code so that functionality does not change, but the readability, design, structure, or maintenance of the code is better. And I put better in quotes here. And I did that purposefully. So better is pretty subjective. Some of these things, readability, design, structure, and maintenance, can be objective. So So keep that in mind. Some of this is subjective, but basically we're going for more robust, we're going for more readable code. And there's a key part of this that I want you to take away, that the functionality does not change. So when we're sitting in meetings with our fellow developers and they say, I need to refactor the code and add that new feature in, or I'm going to go back and refactor that and fix that bug. These are different activities. Refactoring is the activity where you change the code, but you don't change the functionality. Fixing a bug is fixing a bug. Creating a feature is creating a feature. Refactoring happens without changing the code, or without changing the function. So if you take one thing away from this talk, it is the functionality does not change, right? The functionality does not change. And if you haven't ever looked at code before, if you don't understand how coding works, this may be very confusing. I'm going to go through English examples here, human readable examples, to define this better. So the terminal, and I'm going to show you in just a minute, the term refactoring came from Martin Fowler. This is his original book. This is the one you want if you're in Java. He's got a second edition that came out recently. It doesn't look like this, but he is the author, Martin Fowler. And the new book is in JavaScript, which is getting so much use these days. This book gave me a lot of power with coding. It taught me more about object-oriented design than I thought I had to learn. It taught me so much about good object-oriented design and some of the less obvious pieces of design and objects and how we think about code. It's an absolutely fantastic book. If you are into coding, that's a great book to read. If you know enough about object-oriented programming that you want to learn more, this is the way to go. And it's one of the more definitive techniques that I've learned with regard to software engineering and coding throughout my career. So I'll leave that there for you. So show me. So let's do this. Let's get into some actual something readable. So hopefully you can see my screen. I believe you can. I just can't see on my screen what you can see right now. Maybe I can. Let's see. Share. Ah, yes, I can see what you can see. So you are seeing some text here. And the text is a test case. I figured I'd pick something familiar to us to work with. It's a test case for this application. If you've joined me on these webinars before, you may have seen this application. It's an invoice manager, and it's one that one of my folks over here wrote up, and he did a wonderful job at it. There are bugs in it. There are places where features should be different. That's all fine because we need a place where we can go and talk about bugs and expose bugs and show them. So it's not a perfect application. It's supposed to manage invoices for business. Invoices are just bills that businesses have to pay. They send them to each other in order to get paid. This system allows us to add invoices, so we can click on add invoice, go in, add an invoice number, a company name, whatever info is here. Some of you are already seeing things that could potentially be bugs. But we can add all that in, and then we go back to the invoice manager and we can see what we entered. We can also click on that invoice number and see it again here. We can delete that invoice and see that it's gone. There's only 2 pages here, add an invoice and invoices. Very simple application, not a lot to it, perfect for our use. Any questions about that, make sure to type them in and I can explain it a little bit better. There's not a lot here to see with regard to this. So this is the test case that I created to work through an English language example of refactoring. Now, Fowler talks about refactoring and says that if you're doing anything other than code, it's not refactoring. So I'm taking a little bit of liberty here and doing something that's not coding and restructuring it and reformatting it to give you an idea of what it means to refactor. So hopefully this is good for our purposes and hopefully we all understand. I'm going to read this to you in case you can't see it or can't read it yourself. This test case says, this is a positive test case to determine if an invoice with good data can be added to the system. Test case management reference number, and we all have these reference numbers for our test case management systems, 342341. Navigate the browser to the invoice application at, and then it has an address, a URL. Click the Add Invoice link, fill in the invoice number text boxes 1, 2, 3. Fill in the company name text boxes, Beaufort Fairmont LLC. Fill in the type of work text box as, and I'm not going to read all of this, but there's a lot of fill in as stuff here. And then we say click the Create button. The Invoice Manager page with a list of invoices, including the invoice data from this test case, is displayed. So I'm sure some of you at some point or another have seen test cases like this. Very talky, very wordy, a lot of words here. It's hard. You have to read through it. You have to think through it. I believe that we can do this a little bit better. So what I did was I started refactoring it. So I'm going to show both on the left the original version of this test case, and on the right the next version. So the old version on the left, the new version on the right. And we're going to take steps to go through this as we would with a refactoring in code. So the first thing that I would do here is I'd start at the beginning and I would give this test case a good title. Something that someone reading it can know more about than just this first line where we reference this reference number. I called it Add a Good Invoice. I think that we can take away from that pretty much what it is we need to do. So I've done a renaming. So this is your first refactoring, and there are specific techniques to refactoring with names. Rename is one refactoring. So in code, we would take a method or a variable or a class name, and we would rename that in order to get better meaning from it. I believe in this example, we've got better meaning by calling this Add a Good Invoice than what's there to begin with. Secondly, I put a reference number in the title. Sometimes this helps, sometimes it doesn't. It may not be the way you do it. It may not be the best way, but I can tell you this, at least I don't have to drill down in here and read all the way to the second sentence to figure out what the reference number is. Many tools would have a reference number built in for their test case management systems. In Jira or whatever tool you use, it would be built in. In this case, I'm just pulling it out. I'm using a convention of using parentheses to put it there. So I've gotten rid of these first two lines. Is refactoring about getting rid of lines? Not really. It is, however, about if I can take 2 lines of text or 2 lines of code and get more meaning, better communication out of 1 line and less words, absolutely refactoring would be about that. I want at the end of this for someone who's never seen this before to read through it and have an idea of what this test is doing and why it's doing it. I want to convey meaning the most succinct manner as possible. I want people to not have to think so much about all of this text here, okay? So I think I've done that in this example. Would love to hear your thoughts. Please put them into the questions here or wherever you would like to, the chat or the questions. The second example, so I did one thing there, I did rename. That was the first refactoring. The second thing that I'm gonna do is I noticed in this older version on the left that it says navigate to the browser to the invoice application at, and then it's some URL. There's a whole sentence there to tell me to navigate. Now, if I work at this company for more than a day, I know that our application is a web application. I know that I'm going to need a URL to go to. It's understood that we have URLs with browsers and with web applications at this point in time. So I can just put URL here. URL is something that everyone should know in this environment. And I've basically done the refactoring called introduce variable. So I've created a variable. URL has a meaning, and that meaning is this address, okay? So it also gives me something else. I have a step that we're doing here without even really having to talk about it. We're doing the step of going to this URL in order to start doing work. Now in your system, you may have another step here. You may, instead of URL, use the name of a system. That would be really helpful. And you could change the name of the system in order to use the same test case against different systems. So you would be doing introduce variable again in addition to this with what you do. So is this more meaningful? I think it is. I think it is. I think that we've taken 3 lines of text and converted them into basically 6 or 7 words or pieces of information that I can briefly glance at and know at a moment's notice exactly what's going on and what's happening here. You know, I did notice someone said something about background noise, and I think it's because my computer's a little hot. I'm going to try this a little bit differently and see if I can make the fan stop, or it could be my speaker here, so forgive me if that's it. Don't ignore the spacing. Spacing is critically important for us to gather information. We had no spacing on the original test case. It was a bunch of words all together. When I start introducing spacing, it tells me, okay, here's one thing here, space, here's another thing here. They're two different things. They're separate from the next thing. So my brain recognizes that very quickly. Use spacing to your benefit. So let's look at the next step. Step 4. Now this looks a lot different. It looks a whole lot different, right? We took all this text and now we've got this. And Paul, we have a problem. It's longer. It takes more lines. Did I tell you that refactoring was about eliminating lines or eliminating code? No. We talked about better design, better structure, better architecture. We talked about better meaning. We talked about readability. We didn't talk about less. Many times we end up with less code when we're coding, when we do this, but sometimes we don't. And I know a lot of schools and a lot of schools of thought out there say, when you have code, if you can reduce it to less code, it's better. Well, better for what? Better for maintenance? Probably. Better for readability? Not necessarily. If you've ever looked at a regular expression in Perl, you know what I mean. You can write and do a lot of stuff with a regular expression in very few characters, but the meaning is very difficult to understand. Sometimes more words are better. Sometimes more lines are better. Sometimes more space on the screen is better. We're looking, in this case, for readability, quickly understanding, and being able to repeat this over time. So, first thing I did, take this line out. Click the Add Invoice link. That's a navigation piece. I'm not sure what to do with it yet, but I do know that the next piece here, we just had a lot of sentences that said the very same thing. Fill in the invoice number text box. Fill in the type of work text box. Fill in the amount of amount text box, okay? So each one of those sentences was structured exactly the same. Fill in component value, right? They were all the same sentences. So in terms of English, what can I do with that? I can say, okay, the following data are all valid inputs, okay? So I've done two things here. One is say, you're gonna have data that I'm gonna give you. The second is they're all valid. And this goes back to strengthening what I mean in this title by good invoice. So I'm trying to keep things together here, keep the same idea, maybe say it in a slightly different way in case somebody didn't get it to begin with when they read this. Use data like this. So that's new, like this, to create a good invoice, So good invoice is the same as what we set up here. So data like this. How many times have you seen a test case written in human readable language that has specific values and you don't know why the values are there? You don't know why they're there. You read through it and you're like, well, maybe I have to use this particular ID for this particular thing. What is specific that has to be specific? What is not? So we tried to call this out in this refactoring. So first of all, we changed the format and we basically did what's called, extract method. So in a refactoring, in the typical refactoring, we're doing the equivalent of extract method. The method is input data, right? So input data. We give it the value, the actual thing on the screen, invoice number or company or type, the component that we're filling the data in for, and we give it the value that we're going to pass in. 1, 2, 3, 4 for invoice number, company name is both for Fairmont, type is consulting for test automation. And I also made a couple notes here. So this wasn't in the original text. I haven't changed the functionality, but I've given more information. Must be unique. So the invoice number must be unique. That's helpful. I can't tell you how many test cases I would have understood at a glance if I had seen, hey, this must be unique, and understood what I needed to do. We also say not only does it need to be unique, but it must not exist in the system. So it must not exist in the system when we create this, meaning there's some setup work. There's something you have to do here. you have to create a unique invoice number. Now, you and I, as good testers, would look at the system and say, hey, you really shouldn't be introducing an identifier within the application. Anyway, you're right. You found a bug in the code. Go you. You've done a wonderful job. The application didn't work right for that. It asks for a unique identifier from the user. Probably not a good idea. You'd like that to be system generated. But that's the way that it is right now. And the purpose of this test case is not to find that defect or expose that defect. The purpose of this test case is to give us our baseline, our positive test case to walk through here. So you've seen what I did here. It's pretty simple. I put everything into a list. It's easier on the eyes. Hey, if we had a table here, if we were out of a text-based system, maybe that would be better. Maybe I could use tabs to make this better and format better on the screen. You've got better ideas than I do about this, I know it. But is this better than what we had before? I think so. So far we've learned about rename, the refactoring called rename. We've learned about introduce variable. We've learned about extract method. So those are all the things that we've done so far. And finally, we have the same text down here. It's starting to look easier on the eyes. I think I can understand this much more easily, much more quickly. Let's look at the next step. The next step was also to elaborate on what's going on and to be more clear using spacing. So down at the bottom, we had this piece that said the invoice manager with page must list the invoice, but it doesn't tell us why it's doing this, okay? Instead, if I say verify the invoice was added by, or something along those lines, then I know what I'm doing is what some will call a check, a verification step, a validation point. This is what I'm doing to verify that the test did what we believe it should do, okay? That's what we're doing there. So I pulled out the verification point. I love having setup early in the test. I love having expectations and assertions and verifications in one spot. I like that because it helps me with the formatting. I know what the test case looks like. I know what my expectations are. I understand exactly what's going on, okay? So that's our English example, and I'll make these available to anybody. Let's go into something a step more complex than this. And this was really a renaming of this code here. So it's like we're doing renaming again. You might, if you were in code, you might do a comment. You might name something differently in order to get this information across differently. You may pull it into its own method to have some meaning. So I've gone through several different refactorings. What I want to do next is to use a tool called robotframework to show what this might look like in something more like coding. So you're on the call. If you've got questions, this is a great time to ask them. I know that it takes a little while to write them. I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to robotframework as you're typing those as we go along. You don't need to know robotframework. Just know that it's what I call a test case driver. So what it does is it drives your system under test, whether that's the browser, if it's a database, if it's a service, whatever it is, that system under test, it's driving it, and it drives it in a human readable language. I think that this is much more human readable than a programming language. Many more people can access this, can understand this than they might with programming, whether it's Java, C#, or whatever else. So we are doing the very same test case that we did before. We're using robotframework. This is what a test case or test suite would look like in robotframework. It's built in text files. You don't have to use an IDE. The one that I'm using here is called Atom. Atom is being used a lot for things like this. It's being used a lot for Python. It's being used a lot for JavaScript and for a number of other languages. It has a rich ecosystem of plugins around it. So you notice the coloring of how this works. There's a syntax parser plugin that allows us to get colors for robotframework here, which is really nice. I've got one in here for diffs. It connects nicely to Git and to all the different Git tools that are out there. Someone asked, Doug asked, are these slides going to be available after the webinar? I'll make them available. Email me, paul@beaufortfremont.com. I'm happy to share those with you anytime. And let's see, also, there will be a recording of this. So you'll be able to come back and see the recording for all of this. And I'll make the code available to you if you would like, just by request. I'll be happy to do that. I may actually have some code in Selenium for this as well. We're not planning to go through that today, but I may have that in the future if you'd like it. So Robot Framework, again, it's a keyword-driven tool. It has sections, so you see the settings section that does stuff. You see test cases section that does stuff. You see keywords section that does stuff. A keyword, like in programming, is kind of like a method. A keyword is how we do things in Robot Framework. Everything that's purple in here is a keyword, except for the test case name. Test cases are differentiated in Robot Framework within a file by having the name left justified. So you see TCM, test case management, and then that reference number that we saw before. It's left justified. That means this entire piece here is a test case. If you wanted another test case in the same file, you would have another left justified name and then start indenting every step after that for your test case. So yes, you can put many of these in here. This is not a webinar about Robot Framework, but it is something that we teach. We have a training session on it. We got really great reviews from doing this earlier this year with an insurance company up in New York. They had a wonderful time and they are implementing things with Robot Framework now. Lots of power to the tool. It's a tool that I really like. Cucumber is very similar and you can get similar things out of it. So what is this doing? Well, we do this create session. I don't really know what that is, but let's just forget about it for now. It's something, it's probably something to do with setup. We open the browser. This looks very simple, similar to what we were doing before, right? And we know what open browser means. We give it a URL, we give it a type of a browser. Here we give it Chrome, and that's gonna open up the browser. All of this is coming from Selenium. You guys may have used Selenium. There are bindings into Robot Framework from this library that allow you to implement Selenium commands here and drive the browser with human readable things rather than code, which is nice for some people. So open the browser, we know what that is. Click the link, add invoice, we know what that is. This all looks the same. Go in and input text into the invoice field with 1, 2, 3, blah, blah, blah. Select from a list box by value, click button, page should contain. That was our verification point. We also have this keyword down here, which was just kind of setting up some configuration. You'll notice that we have a test case setup. So this will be run before each test case. And the teardown will be run after each test case. So we'll close the browser and things like that. Now, let's see some progress here. How did we refactor? So first, I added this comment so that you would have this information. If you'd like to get this code, you can read the comments. You'll hear the same thing that I'm going to tell you here in just a moment. The comment basically says, let's add some meaning to this test case. So you'll notice we changed this line from TCM and then that reference number, that ID for your test case, to add invoice. And to keep it exactly like the English language version we just saw, I should have said add good invoice. And I just realized that. So the other thing that I've done here is I've used a tag. So when we're refactoring in code or in something like Robot Framework, we want to use whatever resources we have. In the case of Robot Framework, we have a tool called tags. Tags basically mean to associate some piece of text with the running of this test case, so that when I see it in a report, I can see that information. I can get that information out of the test case through other means. I can get it through code, so I could do really special stuff with it in my CD pipeline. There are a lot of things that I can do with this. I can also include and exclude test cases during a run with tags. So if I were to name that specific reference number in my running of the test case, it would run only the ones with those tags if I included it, or I could exclude that one from a set of tests that I wanted to run. Suddenly we get to being able to very quickly and very easily modifying suites of test cases by parameters when we run these things. You can also use this with code I mentioned, so you can get the running test tags out of the code or out of the execution and use them for other things, like maybe a preprocessor type thing in your CI/CD environment, something gated where we look for specific tags and correlate reports with test cases in the test case management system. That's a really nice thing to have, to be able to do traceability across the board. So we've done a couple things here. We can have a convention that we always put the reference number in a tag. That could help us. So let's see what's next. We really haven't done that much here. We renamed the test case. So once again, the rename refactoring is what we did. Let's look at the next one. Oops, that's not going to look like it. Number 3 looks very similar, but a couple things changed. So I told you earlier, I don't know what this does. I lied. I do know what it does. It's doing some setup. It's cleaning out all the invoices in the system using a RESTful API call. So the system that we're working on is a RESTful system. It's got endpoints for the REST API that I can call to do special things. In this case, this is the server address, and the endpoint is this endpoint, delete all invoices. So I'm cleaning up all the invoices out of the system so that when I run my test case, I can see exactly the one that I created. Now, this is not a data strategy that you can use in every case. It's one that I can use here, and it's the easiest, most effective one that I can use here in this case to make sure that this test case will run every single time the same as it ran before. Hopefully that's the case. It should do that every single time unless someone is so fast that they can create an invoice between the time that I call delete all invoices and I go down here to start verifying things, but it runs pretty quickly. So I've taken all of this out and put it into a special place. I put it into the keywords down here. You notice before we didn't have a delete existing invoices keyword. Now we do. What's in here looks very much like what's up here. It's the same. So this refactoring is one we mentioned before. It's the idea of extract method. We're doing extract keyword, I guess is what it would be called. But we're extracting out a few things to get meaning from it. Now it disappeared up here and you're going, Paul, wait a minute, you can't just make it disappear. Good catch, I can't. So we used what was available to us. Remember, we want to use the techniques, the abilities that are available to us when we're doing refactoring. In this case, I know I have a test setup that we can do. It'll run before each test case. I've added in the keyword delete existing invoices, and it's going to be called as a piece of the setup. So before each test case runs, we're going to call delete existing invoices. That's going to put us in a clean state, data-wise, a clean state application-wise to run this. So I no longer need to call it in the test case. I call it in the test setup, and I'm done. It'll be run before all of this. Cool? Cool. So the test case is getting a little bit simpler. We hid some things, but it's not completely hidden. Anyone who's using this at some point is going to understand, oh, I know what test setup is. They're going to go in and they say, why is it that I always have a clean situation to run this in? And they'll say, okay, maybe something's happening in test setup. Yes, look at that, delete existing invoices there. You may want to have that explicitly called in here for communication purposes. It's totally up to how you do things, and it may make more sense in your environment to have that there. The comment here is for our purposes today to explain what it is I did. So everything else pretty much looks the same here, which is nice. We've done one small step. Refactoring, you're doing one small step at a time. And as you're doing refactoring, if you're a developer, you want to go small steps at a time because remember, we're trying to not change the functionality. Refactoring does not change the functionality. So I need to be able to check. I need to be able to check to see what works. So there's kind of this presumption with refactoring that you have test cases to tell you whether or not something changed when you made a change, whether or not functionality changed. So if I have a very full comprehensive suite of unit tests or service level tests or whatever they are, and I can run them in a split second, I can make a change like that, run all the tests super fast, 1 second, and see if it worked or not. I need to be doing that as I'm showing you this. So let me show you, I forgot, let me show you refactoring. The first step works. I'm going to run it. This is how you run a robot command. And I'm in the wrong directory. So let's try that again in a way that'll work. This is what the output would look like. most of the time with Robot Framework, you're running it in CI or you're running it through a command line. A lot of people get freaked out by the command line. There's not much there to be freaked out by. We're just running one command there and making sure we're in the right direction. If you are in any kind of software development job and you don't know how to use the command line, I would strongly urge you to learn how to use the command line. It is one of the most powerful things. It may look archaic to you, but it's the most powerful thing that you could probably know. It's not going to be asked for on any job application for you. It's not going to be something that a manager asks you during an interview very often, but it is incredibly powerful and very helpful to know. You can do magic that you can't do otherwise with the command line. It's also going to help you set up CI/CD a lot of times. So this is the output from Robot Framework. It shows us that we ran these test cases. You can drill down in here and see the actual one we did. You can see each step along the way, and you could even see, I think by tags in here. Oh, well, I must not have done the tags right. But you should be able to see through tags what's going on here, and that may be because I only have one test that ran. Oh, well, this is number one, and we didn't do anything other than number one, and we didn't have the tag until number two, so that's why that doesn't show yet. So we could do number two, the second example. It's going to run, it's going to pass, and you're going to get the same output there. And I can go in here and somehow look at the report. It shows me where the report is. Right here, it actually put it to the same place, so I ought to be able to just refresh this. There we go, number two, and then we can actually drill down in here. You see the statistics by tag. There's our tag showing up there, so we can go in and look at results for each tag. That's kind of nice. If I want to see what failed related to a particular test case from my old world test case management, that could be really helpful. So I could go through each one of them and show you how that they run. Each one of them does. The changes in number four here are a little different, okay? So we notice that there is a new line in the settings section of the file, resource. So a resource file in Robot is a place where you can put globals or put variables, put things that are used multiple times, or things that you want to use as a variable, things that you want to use in more than one file, Robot file. So we're going to use that because as we worked through this, we got to the point of open browser and realized we had these hard-coded values. What's the problem with hard-coded values like this? Well, you might want to change them. And if you have to change them, you'd rather not change them in every single test script. Let's say you had 3,000 test cases, all pointing to a particular machine, pre-prod machine, and you had to go in and change the IP address in every one of those files in order to get them all pointed to the same system under test. That would be a nightmare. Don't write code that way. Don't write tests that way. Instead, we can use a variable. So this is called introduce variable, is one of the refactorings here. The second one is, I'm going to call it pull up variable. So in an object-oriented world, you might have a superclass, you might have a variable that you see used in multiple subclasses or that meaningfully should be in the superclass, and you pull that variable up to the superclass. That's the idea of where this came from. I don't have superclasses here, I don't have inheritance, but I have this idea of a resource file. So I'm going to call this pull up variable as well. We can look at the resource file and see that I have defined variables, site URL, browser, API URL. Here's what's really nice. We said we want to use what's available to us with the tools that we're using. So if we're in Robot Framework, one of the things that's a really nice to have, a nice feature to be able to use, is not only can I use these variables in anything that uses this resource file, but I can change them anytime in the resource file, and I can override them when I execute the test case. So if I wanted to override the site URL, if I wanted to change from this IP address to another one, when I execute them at the command line, I can override the value of that variable, and at runtime, it's going to change and use the value that I gave it. This is really powerful with CI/CD. We have these questions like, oh, well, I want to develop my tests against system A, but then I want to run them in CI/CD against system B over on this other machine, And I may even want to use them in 3 other environments. So not having to change them in the code, not having to do a pull request or whatever else in order to get this working is huge, right? If we can just change it at runtime, that's much, much, much more effective. So I pulled those out and put them into a resource file. And I'm just using the name of the variable here. Don't let the squiggly lines and dollar signs bother you. This just means it's a variable. It's called site URL. This just means it's a browser. It's a variable called browser. So we're going to open the browser with the site URL, whatever that is. When I'm reading the test, I don't care. When I'm executing the test, I care. When I'm doing the reporting on the test or looking at the reports from the test, I care. But when I'm developing it, I don't care. And that's the only change we made there. So we did introduce variable, and we also did pull up variable. Let's look at number 5. And I see a couple questions here. I'm going to take a quick break and answer some questions. I'm also going to run each one of these so that you can see that each one of them passes. So we just did test case number 2. Here's number 3. So one of the questions here is from Jan. She says, regarding the REST API to delete the old invoices, I never thought to write an API. For a tester, would writing an API be easier than using Selenium for another tool to clean up old invoices? I thought that writing APIs would be more involved than using Selenium. So number 1, I did not write an API there in that test case. I called an API. So the system already has an API. A lot of systems these days have an API. I'm going to show you what this one looks like in case you haven't seen it before. There is a URL that I can call with a get call, which is the default of what a browser does. So that's what I did here. And it gives us back information. And this is what it kind of looks like. I've got this plugin that's making this look pretty. If you do this on your machine, you're not going to see it quite as pretty. It's going to look a little bit uglier there. But I'm calling that API to get back the list of invoices. The same thing is happening in this section here where I'm doing the delete existing invoices. I'm using the API URL, which is in the resource file now. I'm calling the endpoint delete all invoices for setup. So I want to go back to the question and walk through this. So regarding RESTful API to delete the old invoices, I never would have thought to use, I'm going to say use an API, Jan. For a tester, would using an API be easier than using Selenium or another tool to clean up old invoices? It absolutely could be. So when you're doing setup, you're not verifying the system. If you're verifying the system within the setup, to me, what that indicates is that you've got another test case that should be written to verify whatever it is you think you're verifying, right? Setup is just setup. We're not going to put verification points in our setup. We're not going to put checks in our setup. That's just not the way that we do things. Setup is something that we run aside from the test case. It's not something we're trying to validate. So in that setup code, I don't really care how I do it. A lot of people would say, hey, don't use whatever it is. So like if we're doing add an invoice through the UI, a lot of people would say don't use delete an invoice through the UI, because then how do you know what you're testing or whatever else? If you have a test case that's actually deleting an invoice, they would say don't use the UI to delete the invoice and then verify that you delete an invoice in the same test. You need kind of to separate concerns and to separate dependencies. So using an API, that could be potentially a lot quicker. The call is certainly a lot quicker. When I make that call to the endpoint, it's super fast. When I have to go through and use the UI to try to delete something, it's way slower. So using an API versus using the browser to do things, you can be a lot quicker with setup. It's not something that you're using to try to verify anything, so there are reasons to do that. Plenty of people will delete things directly in the database. They'll add things directly in the database with JDBC, ODBC, SQL type calls to NoSQL, whatever it is, whatever your database is. They'll make calls directly to those databases to either prep data or not. There are lots of other ways to do this. For instance, plenty of people mock out data or mock out third-party systems or use service virtualization to mimic the data that comes in or to create data for the system that you're going to use. And they might have a call within their test case or within a setup to do that. So yeah, we want to be creative in our automation. We want to use the tool that makes the most sense at the time for what we're doing. In this case, I'm using the API because it's quicker, because I think that it's something that is truly very helpful to us. Next step, step 5 here. We're running short on time. I want to do the Amazon card giveaway before 1 o'clock Eastern. I'm watching it. I promise we'll get it in, okay? So create invoice. In this case, we took all of these lines here, all of this input text, and we put it into one keyword called create invoice. You'll notice over on this side, I've created a keyword called create invoice, and I do all the same steps that I did before. We talked a little bit about variables. I said, don't be worried about $ and squiggly lines. All this is saying that when you use this keyword, the first argument afterwards is the name, and then we're going to use that name here. The second argument is the company. We're going to use that here. And you can see that in the call to this keyword. So the invoice number here, the company here, the type here, and so on. The cost here, the date there, and so on. So each of those is helping us add or create an invoice. So when we do that, we're also adding some meaning here. So I've done extract keyword, which would relate to extract method. And then I've moved it into a keyword section so that it's a little bit easier to understand. That one works as well. I could run that test case for you, but we're running out of time here. You saw that number 3 passed. Oops, I just did 3 again. I can do number 4 while we're I'm running out of time and I don't want to mess this up here. Here's number 4. It's doing the same thing as all the other ones did, adding the same data in, creating it, verifying that it's there, and that passed. We could look at that output file just the same there. So in number 6 here, which is our last step for this refactoring, we're going in and we've renamed some things. So I did rename as the refactoring here on the keyword. So rename keyword. I mentioned earlier that some of this may be a little more clear or could be more clear. You'll notice I changed the test case name from add invoice to give us more meaning by saying add a good invoice. Good may not be the best word. You've got a better way to name it, I'm sure. But it's better than it was before. It's an improvement. Create invoice. Instead of passing in all that specific information, I've hidden that. And I hid it because I don't think it's helpful for me reading through this. I think that if I see create a good invoice, I know, okay, I can trust they created a good invoice. If I really want to know about it, all I have to do is scroll down and look at what create an invoice or create a good invoice does. Well, it passes in these values and it passes them into this keyword. I can drill down and understand that. And finally, I took the page should contain and added some meaning to that call by creating a one-line keyword that does exactly this down here. So now I've got meaning in this test case. All right, I'm reading through it. I see this for the first time. Add a good invoice. It's got a tag. We know that in our world, we have a convention with an ID from the test case management system. Open browser, it uses a site URL in a browser. I don't care what that is right now. I can change that anytime because I'm familiar with robot framework in our world. Create a good invoice. Cool. I can assume that the writer knew what a good invoice was, and I verify that it was created. I see what happens there. If I need to see more of that, I can drill down into these, or I can see it within the output of the test case. I can drill down into it there. I've had clients we're working with who have said we have to have really great logs to understand everything. Sometimes the tool you select has a lot to do with whether or not you have good logs. This one gives us some right out of the box. Here's that test case. We see that it's called add a good invoice. We can see in here each of the steps. So remember, I said we can drill down in this in the reporting. I want to show you how to do that really quickly. Verify a good invoice was created. Okay, well that calls the keyword page should contain. So I can see in here exactly the steps that I used. Create a good invoice calls create an invoice with these parameters, and then it calls all of these keywords. And I can even drill down and see when that started, how it started. There's a timestamp, and it tells me exactly what's going on in there, although that may be hard to read for you. I'm going to take a couple questions real quick, and then we're going to do this drawing because that's important to all of us. Is Robot Framework open source? Yes, it is, Alba. Good question. We're using Postman to test APIs. Is Robot Framework free? Yes, it's free. Postman is good for a lot of things. We've actually got a blog post coming up on when to use it, when not to. There's some good things for it. It's good for exploring APIs. It's not that great for automating the testing of APIs. There are other tools that are better for that. Yeah, someone says, hey, so how do I know what endpoints are available in an API? How do I know if I have one? Yeah, so you're gonna have to ask your developers. They usually will have some type of documentation, hopefully of it. Many times they will point you to something called Swagger or some other tool that can give you the information for what an API looks like and how to use it. Um, Yeah, so this person, Chong, says some managers think refactoring is like rework, which is negative feedback on my performance. How can we convince them? That's a really great question. I'm not sure how to convince them. You can point them to this webinar and they could see, maybe I can go back and edit it not to be Chong, but you could point them to this webinar and hopefully they'd be convinced. Refactoring is rework. So I think I would start with being honest and saying it is rework. And I can either tell you about the rework that I'm doing and you can accept it, or as a developer, I'm probably going to go back and do rework anyway and not tell you because it just has to be done for me to understand what's going on in the code to make it better. Uh, if we tell our managers about it and if our managers can know it, at least they can track it. And then we can start allocating parts of the budget of our labor to it. So if we're in an agile environment, we want to have a certain amount of technical debt that we deal with every single iteration or every single sprint. This would be a part of that technical debt, and you can figure out as a team what's appropriate to spend on that and what's not. I don't know about convincing people. That's a whole other thing. There are lots of books about how to convince people, but I think being upfront, first of all, about what refactoring is, about the fact, be honest, it is rework. And if you're scared to say it is rework, you shouldn't be having the conversation. A good manager shouldn't be scared of rework anyway. They're going to say, let's be effective. But if you can rework something today, make it easier for me to create new functionality today, and make it easier for my other developers to understand today, and create a better design that we can work with to create more features faster in the very short term, those are a lot of good arguments. So I don't know how to convince people in all cases. Those are all the questions that I'm going to take for right now. If you have more, feel free to type them in. I'll go through and look at them afterwards and hopefully get a chance to review those and answer you all as well. So I showed you what it was like. Hopefully you know what that's like. I'd like to do a quick poll. If you want the code base from this, in other words, the things we just looked through, send me an email, paul@beaufortfairmont.com or paul.merrill@beaufortfairmont.com. You can tweet me, whatever, but make sure to tell me what you want. Send me the 2019 refactoring webinar. If you put that in the subject line, I'll be able to very quickly send you that information. I want to do a quick poll before we close out and before we do this drawing. Do you want another one of these with code? So how many people would like to see another one of these with code? Do you think people would actually go look at this one first and then do the code one? Do you think you're more ready now to do a code one? Did I miss the mark? Would all of you have liked code and you're upset because I didn't get into code? I don't know. But let me know what you would like to see, because we can add it in and do another one of these. So I see about 65% of people have voted. That's great. 70%, and it was very clear. 86% said yes, I'd like to see another one of these with code. Here's what I want to know: who's going to win? So I was trying to do this as I was talking. This is kind of tricky to figure out, to do a drawing while we're talking here, but here's the drum roll. The winner is Douglas J. So Douglas J, thank you for being here today. Congratulations on winning the Amazon gift card. You should see that within the next 24 to 48 hours appear in your email, and it'll be the same email that you used within this webinar to sign up and everything else. Everyone else, I'm so glad that you're here with me today. I've enjoyed hanging out with you and get to know you a little bit, seeing your questions. Call us when you have interest in getting automation running. So if you need someone to help guide your effort, if you need to ramp up some of your folks to be able to do more things related to automation, take a look at our website, look at the services on there, look at the trainings that we do there. We can do customized training for all kinds of things. If you're introducing a programming language to your testers in order to try to do a transition to test automation, if you are trying to do that transition and you need guidance and a plan on how to do it, there are several well-known approaches to this and some that fail horribly. I would like to keep you from the fail horribly because there's a huge cost to failing horribly with this. And we can help you around that and instead make sure that you have more impact and more productivity out of this if you listen to our experience and move forward with us on that. So, and if you'd like to chat, I love to hear your challenges and what's going on. Take a picture of this, email me, tweet me, whatever. Let's set up some time to talk through what your challenges are and see if we can help you. I'd love to find out if that's the case. I appreciate each one of you being on the call today, and I look forward to seeing you on the 18th of June with Lisa Crispin. I'm so excited Lisa's going to join us. So thank you so much. The recording will be up in hopefully about 24 hours or less. And I look forward to talking to you soon. Don't be a stranger. Thanks. Bye.